Hey everyone, it's Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the show where I sit down with fellow writers and we have a lovely conversation about the craft, the industry, the highs and the lows, and at the end we make up an impromptu short story together. So that's kind of the hook of this whole show. I was very excited for my guest today. Today I had on Stuart Turton. So I met Stuart a few years ago at an event because we actually share the same publisher. And so his debut novel was coming out and we were at, I think, some event in New York with our publisher. And this book comes out and it just catches on fire. So the book, his debut novel was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. And just, it did tremendous business and it got amazing critical reviews. So that's just been great. And he followed that up with The Devil in the Dark Water, and he's got more in the pipeline. And he's a fantastic guy to talk to. He's really funny. I love listening to him talk about his writing process because he writes very complex and cerebral mysteries. And, you know, we talked about plotting versus pantsing, how much does he plot and what happens when he thinks of another idea, after he's plotted everything out and, that could end up having him cut 50, 60, 70,000 words. And he just talks about the struggles with writing the kind of complex stories that he does. So we had a fantastic conversation. And at the end, we made up a pretty cool short story together. So enjoy. This is me talking to Stuart Turton.
Hiya, mate. How you going?
I'm well. How are you? Sorry, we were having some difficulties there.
That's okay. That's every Zoom meeting I've ever been on.
You think we'd have it all down by now? Normally it's totally smooth, but for some reason with you, it was like I was having a little difficulty there. But we're all good now, man. We're flying clear.
No, it's me, mate. It's me. Every time I come near this damn platform, something goes wrong. So for me, that's the ultimate pandemic is ending benefit. It's not that all these lives will be saved or life can get back to normal. It's that Zoom calls will finally start working.
Are you that guy, like with technology in general? Do you have or do things just not work around you?
Yeah, well, I'm that guy because I used to be a technology journalist. So which is the worst thing to be, but I can't accept the front end of things or just if I get a piece of technology, I have to dig into it and then I break it, of course, because I can't put things back together.
But you learned in the process, you learned about the technology and maybe you can fix it because you learned it. Who knows?
No, sadly not, because I'm a truly stupid man. All I learned is how to break things better. That's what I've got.
Well, we all have to be good at something. So where are you? You're somewhere in the UK, right?
Yeah, I'm in Hertfordshire, which is about 25 minutes north of London.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful little village with absolutely no diversity in it whatsoever. It's just a bunch of very rich white people living a very nice life. It's a very curious place. So I have to go back into London periodically to just refresh myself and get some culture.
Are you from there?
No, I'm from just outside Liverpool, which is to the north of England, in a very sort of working class town, warehouses, chemical factories. That's where I come from. Yeah. So this is bewildering to me being down here. I'm surrounded by lawyers and bankers and wealth managers. So no creativity whatsoever.
Right. Well, so sometimes finance is very creative depending on how hard they're trying to hide their assets. But what brought you? What was the attraction to that town? Besides the lack of diversity, apparently.
The same old boring thing. We had a child.
Yeah.
So we were living in southeast London in a tiny little flat and we had to move. And we just started looking around and our friends lived here in this town and we'd gone out to see them. And it's just, there's a park every sort of 3 meters. It's just one of those places you're not allowed into this town unless you've got a pram or like another child on the way. So basically it was just perfect. And we came out and it was just the easiest place to have a child, and all the schools are really good, and everything you want apart from the diversity is very good. So we were just like, oh, we'll come out here and then we'll go back to London later, and you know how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny, like, years and years and years ago, when we were first having kids, and when we were thinking about it, we were living, my wife at the time and I were living in Miami. I'm like, I don't want to raise a kid in Miami, man. So we moved to Colorado, speaking of lack of diversity, but to the Boulder area, which is a little bit more diverse, but it was the same consideration. But that was a long time ago. It's funny, today my daughter, who's my oldest child, is graduating high school. So it's it's been like, it's crazy. It's crazy to just see, like, holy shit, she's going to be 18 and she's going to another state for college. And so she's just moving away. I'm like, wow, this is like a real milestone.
Yeah. I can't even, I'm still at that stage. My daughter's 3 and I'm begging for that moment every day. I'm just like, when does she move away to another state? Like, when does that happen? Because like, there is no free time and there's absolutely no sort of, like, she is wonderful, but she is everything at the moment. It's you brutal. Know what it's like.
It's brutal.
Eyes to the back of your head, like, cannot keep up, and you're exhausted all the time.
All the time. I remember sleeping in my car, like, just if I was driving somewhere, I would just pull over in the middle of the day. I'm like, I am just going to sleep for 15 minutes in my car in this parking lot of a Walmart because I need something, because it's brutal. So, and so number 2 on the way at all, or you're good with number 1 right now? We're good with number 1. We have that thing that every couple must go through, where you have the first one and you have a wonderful day with your child, and you're dead set. At the end of that day, you're like, we're having another one. I'll have 15 of these. This is fantastic. And then the day after, she is a monster. And I don't understand why anybody creates monster novels when they could just write about children. Totally.
And and you're just like, no, this one will be enough. And let's just hope that she leaves home very, very soon.
I have a specific memory of, like, the day bringing my daughter home from the hospital, because we were in the hospital for about 3 days, and the day bringing her home, and we didn't have anyone helping us at the time. So, you were having help in the hospital, and then coming home, shutting the door, and just having this overwhelming sense of like, she's still here. Like, we've got to, like, this is on us now. There's no, like, just all of a sudden time just stopped. And I'm like, all right, I got to just collect myself and breathe for a moment, because, like, this thing we got to keep alive.
It's nuts, isn't it, that they would ever, and it's so, like, obviously for, like, doctors and nurses and the rest of it, but it really is like, okay, cheerio. And you're like, I should not be allowed out of here.
They don't let me anyone have a kid.
Yeah.
It's really irresponsible.
It should be licensed, at very least, with training courses. Yeah. You should have to pass some sort of driver's class first. Like, there should be something. But either way, I'm talking myself about the second one as we speak.
So you're growing up in Liverpool, and you have siblings, or?
Yeah, one sister.
Yeah. And what were your parents doing at the time when you were young?
A variety of honest, proper jobs. So my dad was a manual labourer who did everything. So if there was any job that required his hands, he would do it. Yeah. And he was often working 2 jobs at a time. So my dad he'd be working in, like, a chemical factory at night and making bricks by day, or he'd be driving
He was very Liverpool.
He was very sort of like, well, Liverpool is creative and it is about music, but it is a working class city.
Sounds like Manchester a little bit too.
Yeah, exactly. So, and my town is Widnes. It's perched right between them. So it's about 40 minutes away from Manchester on a train, about 20 minutes from Liverpool. But otherwise, the influences sort of pour right into this town. To the point where you can go for one of the Northwest football clubs. But being a Widnesian, one of the few benefits of being from my hometown is you can take your pick of one of the great football clubs, because you either support Manchester United, you can support Liverpool, or you can support Everton. Job done. So, so my dad was doing those sorts of jobs, and my mum was working on a supermarket checkout. That's what she did. So when we were growing up, and then my mum was that lady who was always. She had us young, so my mum was only 21 when we were born, and she was always with no offense to her, but she was much smarter than just raising 2 children. That was not what she was destined for. But she had to make money, so she went and did that. And then the moment we were old enough, she went and started getting jobs where she'd get promoted through the ranks and she could start having more responsibility and all that sort of stuff. But growing up, supermarket checkouts, because they never worked the same shift. So my parents would see each other walking in and walking out of the doors, and that was the life. That's what you grow. That's what you grow up thinking that life is like, because they're just. My dad worked all night, or my mum worked all night. One of them was during the day. When we went to school, somebody would turn up to pick us up and then get us home, and then the other person would rush out the door. So I can't imagine the sacrifice. I think about it sometimes now with my own daughter, because we thankfully don't have to live this way, me and my wife, and it just must have been brutal for them. I mean, so hard.
Yeah, and you don't know any better necessarily, because you're just in that mode, kind of like a survival mode, I assume, at that point. But you probably don't even have time to really reflect on, is this making me happy? Are we happy as a couple? Are we instilling, joy and happiness into our children? Or are we making them destined to say, this is what we have to do? But it sounds like, you didn't fall into that. You didn't have to, obviously, but.
No, well, my parents would never have let me. What was interesting is that my mum and dad, they were living this life, and it was always quite clear. Like, we'd have a holiday every year, and it was like we'd go away for 2 weeks to somewhere in like Europe, to an island, and we'd have a nice family holiday, and then we'd come back and it'd start again. And I remember I would see on television, I would see like shows and movies like a James Bond or something, and you'd almost have these people in these beautiful clothes having these beautiful parties, and that, I've said this before somewhere, but that to me was as fantastical as sort of Lord of the Rings. Like, I could not believe
right, it's pure fantasy.
It was ridiculous. And like in these massive manor houses, there was none of this stuff in Widnes. There was none of this stuff in my hometown. There was just row upon row of the same sort of street with exactly the same houses, with all your friends doing exactly, their parents had exactly the same sorts of jobs. And you were just like, you'd see these people, and it'd be like Tuesday, and they'd be having lunch, and you'd be like, why are they not in work? And then I'm like, oh, well, they're rich, they don't have to work. And I'm like, explain rich and explain not working. So you had
explain lunch.
Explain lunch. So you have all these very strange, and it was just, again, it's just endlessly fascinating. But I remember saying to my dad once, I said, well, Dad, what do you do? He was like, oh, whatever his job would have been at that time, I think he was a bricklayer. And I was like, I'm a bricklayer. And I was like, oh, because you're like a kid, you're just like, oh, I want to be a bricklayer as well. And he was just like, you're never going to be a bricklayer. That's not what you're aiming yourself at. You're going to university and you're going to be something else. I don't know what it is, but he was very clear. So whatever, and this is to make no judgments about that life whatsoever, but for my dad, that is not what he wanted for me. It was very clear that I was not going to repeat his steps.
Did he have a college education?
No, he didn't have time. Like, again, in Widnes in the 70s and 80s, I was born in 1980, and it was still Widnes still felt like the 60s at that point. And it was very sort of like, there was defined roles for working class people in these towns. There was no real social mobility for them. They were supposed to, my dad had come from a very, very poor family. He had to go to work as soon as he could to support his family, because his own dad wasn't worth much as a father and as a provider and as all these other things. So my dad had to step in. So there was no opportunity for him to go to any education, let alone higher education. My mum had a bit more, but it was still expected that as soon as possible she would get married and have a child. And she did that, and she kind of reflected on that experience later.
So if that was your parents' kind of desire for you to go to higher education, what were there steps along the way? Were they actively, I don't know if you had to pay for your university, or were they doing stuff to fulfill that? Or was it kind of on you to make sure you went down that path?
No, they were taking steps by actively working and making sure that we could eat food and having a roof. Like,
right.
I mean, for them, that was it. Like, everything they earned went into us. Everything we got nice clothes. Not nice clothes. We got clothes, and we didn't have to wear hand-me-downs. We went on this 2-week holiday a year, which was a big thing in Widnes. Like, at this point, even in the 80s, and I make it sound like it's 1642, but like, I remember none of my friends did this. None of my friends had a holiday to look forward to. They could go to a caravan park somewhere in Wales, maybe, but not this guaranteed foreign trip every year. So my parents, pooled all their money and give us this life and give us these experiences. But while they were doing it, the expectation was that we would go on to higher education. So you didn't question it. You were just like, well, that's what I'm going to do. You just went in and you got good grades. My mum would never allow us to skive off school. She would never allow us to claim we were a bit sick so we could have a day off.
Right.
She pushed us into school every day. You have to go. If you feel sick, well, just see how you feel at midday and then come home. So is your homework done? So you keep on top of that. It wouldn't be like sitting down helping us with our homework because she didn't have time, but it would be like, have you done your homework? You're not going out until you've done your homework. And because that expectation just sat there, that's what we went and did. We just went through school. We went into university, both me and my sister, and we came out with what we came out with. But they never guided us. They were never like, you should become a doctor or a lawyer, or you should take this degree. That was not their area of influence. Their area of influence was, we will make sure there's money and we will make sure there's a good home for you, a safe home. We will give you love and support, but you kind of have to pick a path, and that's on you.
So what did you study at university?
So I rewarded all of this by...
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Well, I initially went to study law, which made my parents very happy at quite a prestigious university for law. And I went there and I hated law.
Yeah.
And I hated all the people who were studying law. More importantly, everyone who was on that law course, to me, at that point, seemed like an absolute dick. So I just...
They probably were. And still probably are.
But it was the same conversations about the prestigious firm they were going to go work for and how much money they'd earn and sort of blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, God, this can't be life. So I did that for a year and then dropped out and I turned up at my door. I hadn't told my parents what I was doing. I simply just turned up at their doorstep and was like, hello, I'm not doing law anymore. I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, don't know. I'm going to take a year and think about it.
Oh,
so I know. So I got a job in a call center around the corner from where my parents lived to make some money. So they must have been like, oh my God, it's happening again.
The cycle is repeating.
Yeah, exactly. But I then went and, oh God, this is another story. I'm quite embarrassed by this. I looked at the table in the UK of all the universities, and they give you all these stats and breakdowns of them. And I looked for the one that had the least teaching hours of any course in the UK. And it turned out to be an English and philosophy degree at Liverpool University, which had the grand benefit of being round the corner from where I lived anyway. B, being a great city, which I absolutely adored. And C, meant I was only in a classroom for about 4.5 hours a week. Like nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. It was phenomenal. The rest of it was like, because you're supposed to be reading huge philosophy textbooks and the works of Shakespeare pretty much every week. I'm supposed to be. Right. So that's what I did. So I signed up to that course, and that's what I did for my degree. So I know I'm the proud owner of the most useless degree that anybody could possibly get. English and philosophy, the language I already speak, and philosophy, which is absolute bobbins and makes you the person nobody wants to talk to at a party. That's what I've got.
And all because you were just lazy.
And that is it. It's because I tried law, and law was so intense.
Yeah.
And because I couldn't work out, I genuinely, after the law thing, I couldn't work out what degree to take. I couldn't work out what to do with myself. Like, what was I supposed to? Because I'd spent my education knowing I was going into law. And once I discovered that I didn't like law, I had nothing else. There'd never been a plan B. Right. So it's like, one course is as good as the other. If I'm going to do this, I might as well enjoy myself. That's what I fell back on. It was like, I might as well have a good time while I try and work out what to do with myself.
Well, yeah, and you were wiser than a lot of people, maybe unintentionally, by dropping out of law, right? I mean, think about how many people go through that exact trajectory and don't like it, but just assume, I don't really like this, but I just assume nobody likes whatever they do, so this is what I'm going to do. And it's profound how if you are able to realize that, particularly at a younger age, and move towards something that at least you have an interest, if not a passion in, it's life-changing. It's completely like you could be a lawyer now and you'd be a dick.
Oh yeah. I mean, no, let's make no mistake. I am a dick, but I'm just not a lawyer. So I've already got.
You're just not a well-paid dick.
I'm just not a well-paid dick, and I'm not surrounded by other dicks, which is the thing. It's perfectly feasible to be the only dick. It is, and it feeds back into the dickishness of yourself. That's what I don't need. I don't need my own dickishness coming back at me. So, but it's weird, looking back at that and dropping out of law. it wasn't. It's funny. I think you can only do that. It's weird to me that more people don't do it because it feels to me like something you can only really do at 21 because you have nothing else. Like, there's no kid. I could always drop back into my parents' house. I had that luxury. I didn't have any massive bills. There was nothing apart from, you've started on this journey, so some weird sense of obligation towards completing it. I felt like completely free. Like, it didn't feel like a big deal to me to be like, no, I don't want to do this anymore, so I won't do it. Because up until 21, life hadn't ever thrown up any major hurdles. Like, nothing had ever truly gone wrong for me. So why would I think at that point that dropping out would cause me any problems?
Right. Yeah, you weren't riddled with angst over the decision. That's interesting.
No, it's not like how will I pay for my 2 children or anything, or my art habit. Like, it was fine. I don't have a mortgage.
Right.
You know what I mean? As long as I got money for pints, I was fine.
And then, so you get this English and philosophy degree, and how long are you living in the park, as a homeless person after that for?
Year and a half. So seriously, so I did. Every summer while I was doing that degree, I would go traveling. I would go and do 3 months, and I would just travel, and I would use the money because you get student loans, right? So I would use my student loan. I would work still in this call center job. I would do that on the weekends, very hungover. That paid for my life in university because I only ate baked beans and drank. And then I would take the student loan that was theoretically for living on, and I would take that and go traveling for 3 months every year. And I did that, and I absolutely fell in love with traveling and being in other places. And I saved as much as I could with the idea that as soon as university ended, I was going to go away for as long as I possibly could, and possibly as long as I could travel for. And that's what I did. So I went away, and then I started traveling and ended up traveling for 5 years, basically.
Oh, wow.
So, and I kept doing that. And then all that happens is you're 5 years behind the job curve. So I had all these. I came back with all the stories in the world and absolutely no experience of anything, nothing that would help me. And I came back to the UK and could not get a job, just nothing for a year and a half. Like, even if I got interviews, which were few and far between, I would go in and completely stuff the interview up because I didn't know how to be interviewed. I didn't know.
Right.
And
wow.
Yeah, that feels like, looking back, that could have gone on indefinitely because it's not like I ever got any better at it. I think just someone took pity on me eventually.
And so what did you start working as?
I started working I worked on a B2B marketing magazine, B2B, business to business.
Yeah.
I started working on one of those in Manchester called Data Monitor, which is exactly as boring as it sounds. But this not a title that hides depth. It's not a title. It's not one of those jobs where beneath it there was some sort of interesting statistical analysis about the workplace and economy. It was just terrible. It was a terrible. I wrote They wrote reports about absolutely every business segment. So for plant pots, they would write about how plant pots were surging this year. And then I had to write a little 300-word news story that would get people interested in plant pots and then direct them to the report on plant pots. And this was generally what I had to do. And I had performance figures that I had to write 8 of these stories a day, and a bonus if I went over 8. There was, if somebody clicked on them, I got some money, or at least to a certain point, and then I would start getting money. It was, without doubt, the worst job that you could have gotten. But I was so damn grateful to have it that sure. No one has ever given that job more than me. No one's ever sweated over these stories the way I sweated over them.
So that was the beginning of your writing career.
Mate, that was the beginning of my writing career. Before this, I'd gone for a job, and I shit you not, on a magazine called Pipe Monthly.
No.
The worst part about my story about going for a job at Pipe Monthly was I did not get the job on Pipe Monthly. I was deemed unworthy of working on Pipe Monthly. And now, let me give you the second part of why that story is brilliant. It was not pipe smoking. It was pipes for water. It was pipes for water, my friend. It was industrial pipes. I could not get a job on a magazine reporting on industrial pipage. That was how bad my situation had got to. So writing about plant pots in Manchester just suited me down to the ground. I was delighted.
So and you don't have, so you're kind of like me, like you don't have any, well, you have an English degree, but not creative writing in your background, because I didn't start writing until my 30s, and very much business degree, statistical analysis, lots of data. And so do you think do you think these 300 words that you were doing over and over again were kind of feeding some kind of weird creativity, or had you had a creative mind that you had just never nurtured before?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been trying to think about this before I came on, because I was trying to work out sort of what the journey was and when it started. And I think at that point, I was always writing little things. Like I was always writing like half a page of something, and I would just do it when I was working in the call center between calls. Like I'd have a conversation with someone which would be a bit weird, and I would spin that off I would write another conversation that was like funny, and they was all generally quite funny or straight weird things. They were almost like fever dreams, like your brain trying to work stuff out.
And you were just writing those for yourself?
Yeah, they were just scraps of things that I was writing, possibly to keep sane during the most boring jobs in the world.
Sure.
And but they weren't supposed to. They weren't leading anywhere. It wasn't me thinking, actually, secretly I'm an author, or secretly I'm a writer, or secretly this is what I want to be doing. I could construct a sentence, and I was a good communicator, and I've always had that. I've always been able to say exactly the thing that I want to be saying without too much dithering. So I could always do that, and that led me into sort of like magazine work and sort of like a data monitor job and the jobs that followed, because that was the thing that I could do. I had a natural skill for that. I could naturally write an essay that was entertaining. I could naturally write little snippets of things. But I didn't think I had any ability. I never thought about doing anything longer. It wasn't a thing that I was chasing after. So maybe that's a lie though. Not a lie, but maybe an oversight, because I remember thinking when I was like 8 or something, 8 or 10 or 11, I got all these Agatha Christie books. Like I used to, this is like the origin story, but I did get a bunch. My next door neighbor would bring over a bunch of Agatha Christie books from car boot sales, like 1 penny, 2 penny each. Yeah. And she would bring them over and I would read them, and then she'd bring some more the next week. And I remember a conversation with my mom where I finished them all. Over a period of 2 or 3 years, I read these things obsessively and I finished them. And then my next door neighbor for a few weeks just kept bringing the books I'd already read. And my little mind didn't understand this. And my little mind thought these were infinite stories, that they would just keep coming because there were so many. And I got to the end of it, and my mum had to explain that I was done. I'd read them all, and she made me tick them off the list. Like, if you read that one, yeah, if you read that one, yeah, if you read that one, yeah. And we ticked them all off. She's like, well, that's it, you're done. There's no more. And I was like, well, Mum should write another one. She's like, well, she's dead. I was like, how does that affect me? Like, what does dead means nothing to me, right? Like, well, she has gone away, and there will be no more stories.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Mate. And then I remember in my head just being like, well, if I learn to write them, there will be more stories. I can do that. Like, if I can just take over, right? I can do that. So I think at that point, I planted a little flag in my distance, but it wasn't something I sort of like hankered after, or I was chasing, or it was informing my decisions. But maybe maybe somewhere at the back of that brain.
Well, you remember that's a long ago memory to still possess. So the fact that you remember that there probably is something there, you know.
I think so. But again, it's these, I think the memory is because it's a memory of my mum, and it's a sort of like, it's stuck with me, not necessarily because of I say this, you never work it out, do you? But the Agatha Christie stuff was nice, but I remember having these moments with my mum and sort of like how just kind she was in that moment of sitting down, taking these off and taking that time, because she was always had a million things to do. But that was the sort of like, we sat down and we chatted, and she made me aware of something. So a lot of my childhood memories are moments with me and my mum doing a thing together, which is, you know.
So the moment that if there was a moment that you decide to sit down and write long form, was it because you had a story in mind, or was it because you wanted to see if you could do it? Where did that come from?
It came, I think I was 20, I think I was up 23, 24. And I had just read something bad, something very, very bad. And I can't remember what it was, but it was terrible. And I think it was a fantasy novel. I was traveling and I read a fantasy novel. And it was just, you know, when you're traveling and they just have the shelves of like, get one, give one. So I just picked it up, and I cannot express how bad it was.
and it was commercially published.
And it was commercially, but that was the thing that blew my mind. It was like,
your mind couldn't wrap itself around that idea that somebody bought this.
because up until that point, all I'd ever read was quality. So maybe I didn't get on with it, but it was still obviously a technical work of art. It was still something that worked brilliantly and was like had some command of the language and metaphor and story. And this didn't. And it was a proper publisher with a title and a cover, and it was a book, and it was on a shelf, and it was supposed to be good, and it wasn't. It was really bad. I remember just thinking, that's like, oh, like, if someone can publish this, what could I write? Like, what could I do? And it was just a little, and I was traveling, so I had very little else to do. So that's what I decided to do, because like I said, as I was traveling around, I would just add bits. I would just write a novel. Like, it didn't have to be, and I loved Agatha Christie, so I started writing an Agatha Christie style novel. That's what I started doing. And it was garbage. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible thing. And I got about a third of the way into it. But as I had proof of concept, it was absolutely fine, because it was like, well, I can write longer. I can keep going. That doesn't seem to be a problem. I seem to have the mind for sort of like telling a longer story and not sort of rushing to conclusions. But I didn't have any understanding of how to write a novel at that point.
Right.
At 20, I had no clue. I had no clue how to pace. I had no clue what characters were supposed to do over
Points
like
90,000.
Yeah. None of that. All I was doing was just taking bits of Agatha Christie novels that I'd always liked and putting them into one novel. So like and you know, like sometimes you must get this all the time. Like sometimes people want you to read their novel and you do it as a favour to a friend or because you actually like the concept and you're like, okay, I'll read a draft. And what they've got instead of a story and a plot is just things happening one after another.
Right.
With no real sort of understanding of whether that you should calm that down now and this needs to go over here for a little bit. A thing happens. And then someone says something, and then another thing happens, and that's what I wrote. That was my first sort of long form piece.
Yeah,
and it was dreadful.
It's funny. Like I've talked to a decent amount of people, and there's different camps that people their origin stories kind of fall into, and one of them, maybe even the dominant one, is that I can do better than this experience of reading a shitty novel and be like. Is because it makes something totally accessible all of a sudden, you know, and it's like, well, you know, I could do this if this is the bar that's being set. So that's not totally unusual, but what is unusual is like actually putting together, whether it's just a series of events or whatever, actually putting together and completing a full-length novel that's always the hurdle, right? And I know so many writers that just getting it done, whether it's good or bad, is the problem. And they can't. So you kind of recognizing like, hey, I don't have any problem just writing. That's probably one of the biggest hurdles. So you wrote this thing that it went nowhere, I assume.
Oh, I didn't even finish it. I don't think. I can't even remember now. I just remember. I remember knowing it was bad fairly soon into the process. I'd have been like, but it was a thing I was doing while I was traveling. I was having all these other experiences, and then in my downtime, because there's a lot of like bus lounges and bus journeys and airport lounges. There was plenty of time where there was nothing else to do. I didn't have a Game Boy. I didn't have like a mobile phone in these days. Like there was nothing else to do. So I would just either read a book or write a book, and it seemed fairly. So I would just sit there and just write, and that's what I did. And I can't remember how far it got, but I do remember the sense of being like, there's something here that I can learn, right? Like the things that are quite obviously I am not good at feel like things I can learn to do because there was a turn of phrase in there. I could spot that I was like, well, that's a nice line. You're getting to the heart of something with that. Like all the rest is junk, but it was interestingly not a dismaying experience. It wasn't me being like, oh, this is awful. It was like, oh, actually, I kind of enjoy this.
Yes, it's exciting because you have, at that point, you have zero ego around your writing, which is kind of important, right? Because but you still have the perception to say this is junk. Like you at least you're because that's sometimes is a very difficult viewpoint to have. I mean. My first novel was, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, literally no idea. And I wrote it in 3 months and it was this weird thing, but it was terrible. But I did it.
How long? So you wrote your first novel in 3 months. How many words is that?
It was 90,000 words, 80 or 90,000, but that's completely, talk about fever dream. I mean, that is not how I write now. Now, a full novel for me with, a few rewrites and polish it off and get it to my agent is probably 10 to 12 months.
That's incredible to me because I am slow. I am so very slow.
But it's I don't write a lot, but I write consistently. It might be 5, it's every day for like an hour. That's all I do. But you do that every day. And then so that that experience of writing that book obviously was a much more, larger seed that you'd planted. And at that point was it in your mind that, someday I really want to I want to get good at this. I want to keep doing this until, did it start then or did you take a break for a while?
That's part of my personality. So I'd always had that. I have that with everything. I have that with sports that I enjoyed. So I did martial arts to a relatively high level. I did running to a relatively high level. So writing was another thing that fell into, I enjoy this. I cannot tolerate not being good at it, or at least not being sort of like very competent. It's hard for a writer to go out and say they're good because there's always 200 people who are better at least on any given day. But I was very much like, I can see that there's something in this that I can do. I think there's something I can add to it. And I cannot tolerate the idea that I wouldn't get competent at this. I wouldn't, and I can't let it sit there at this level. That's not going to happen. And I was very, very driven back then in all things. So when I was traveling, I carried on. And then when I finally did come home after traveling, it was with I'll come home and I'll get myself situated and I'll get myself a job. And that job will be a job that will teach me how to do this. That's what it gave me. It gave me a sense of, okay, well, I don't want to go and do another university course. I don't want to be educated in creative writing because I don't want to go back to school. That's not who I am. I need a job. I've been out of work for so long. So it was you're going to go into journalism. You're going to go into some form of writing. Yeah. Which obviously then turned out to be Data Monitor and Paper Magazine. But I got into slightly better places after that, but on much better places after that. But at that point, I didn't know how difficult that industry was. I didn't know what it was. I just knew I wanted to write. I wanted to get better at this, and I wanted someone to pay me to be better at this and actually teach me how to do it. But I didn't want it to be school. So newspapers and journalism seemed the obvious thing.
Yeah. And so then that was kind of your career path from there until, are you still doing that, or is it now just creative writing?
It's just creative writing now. Yeah. So
that's great. Great.
No, I've been incredibly fortunate with the books that, they've allowed me, they've just opened, and it takes me to go back to the earlier point, it takes me so damn long to actually write and to get what I want out. And I go right around the houses with that process. There's nothing straightforward in the way I put books together. So if I didn't do it full time, I wouldn't be doing it. I wouldn't be able to do it amongst all the other stuff that's going on in my life. I just would have stopped dead by this point.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it is, everything's anything that you're passionate about, I think you can usually find time to do, but it's depending on how you write, it can be difficult too. I don't know if you do outline or are you a pantser like me?
No, I plan meticulously, and then generally what will happen, but I don't plan the characters, which is a weird thing to say. So I never have a viewpoint going into a book until I start writing it, and then I write the viewpoints for every damn character until I find the one that I'm interested in.
Well, that's why it takes you so long.
Yeah, mate, I know. And the problem is, I did this for the first novel and was like, you'll get better and you'll learn the second novel. And then I did it for the second novel, and I was like, it's because I've got a newborn baby, it's because all this other stuff's going on in my life, and now I'm doing it with my third novel as well. And I'm like, it's just my technique. It's just what I do. It's
a process you need to work through. It sounds like till you find
but it's a pen. It takes forever.
Sounds so terrible.
Mate, for my second novel, I threw away. This is honest to God. You
were saying how many words you threw away?
170 for I threw.
Holy shit!
Basically two books. Yeah. I threw away 2 books for my second book. I threw away 1 book. I threw away 70, I think 70, wow. 68, 70 for the first book. Just tossed copy.
But
it's an absolute nightmare.
But I mean, I think you're stuck with it. Like, that sounds like your process.
Yeah.
And at least I hope you appreciate the fact that all that hell that you're going through is at least working, right? Like, you could be selling two books, like 2 copies, and have gone through all that process. So your books have been very successful. So that's tremendous. But that does sound like a pretty brutal journey. I mean, so I don't plan at all. I just start with an opening scene that I don't even understand. I don't know who these people are or why they're doing what they're doing. It's just the scene that popped into my head. And then the rest of the book, I'm trying to figure out what that scene means. And so I sit down every day. I'm like, I don't know what's next. I just, and I just kind of, but it's fun for me. That's exciting.
The authors you've talked to, this is a psychological thing, right? Because the 2 camps almost can't work out how the other person does it. It's almost like a magic trick. I cannot. No. So for Pantsers, I cannot understand how you do that. If I sit down at my computer and don't know what I'm writing that day, I won't write anything.
Well,
I'll write the same line over and over again. Just
that happens. Right. Okay. Too. But I've tried to outline, because when I outline, or when I at least figure out, okay, the next 4 chapters or however many chapters, these things must happen. Once in a while I'll have that, and then the writing is easy because I kind of know what I'm doing. Because that's a muscle. What's hard for me is figuring out what happens next and if it's the right thing to happen. But I've tried outlining detailed, and inevitably within probably 2,000 words, I deviate because my mind thinks of something more interesting, something that I hadn't thought of before. When I outline, or when I try to outline, everything's very predictable because I haven't, marinated in the story enough where something just suddenly occurred. My subconscious hasn't had that time to kick in. And then it becomes this very boring, predictable book. The other side of that is when you just completely pants, it could be like just this totally implausible story. But at the end of the day, it's the most interesting. I never do any of that with the idea of like what's best for the book. I do it like what's the most fun for me, and it's the most fun for me is if I'm just kind of it's like reading a book. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm going to spend the next hour figuring that out or discovering that, and when that you have those weird moments of like, oh, what if this happened, and that's a really fucked up thing that happens. And you're like, I'll give it a try. And you were like, wow, this changes everything. That is like, that's the glorious part of writing to me.
See, for me, the most fun part of writing a novel is the 3 months before I ever write a novel. And I do all of that you've just said. So that for me, I have a pantsing stage, which is my planning stage. So I won't write a word of a novel for 3 months. Like, I will sit down and try and work it out. I will try and work out, because I write murder mysteries. I'll start with a body and I'll start with an impossible murder. They're the things I love doing. So I'll start with that and then I'll work backwards. Why would someone need to be killed this way? Who would ever be able to kill anybody this way? Who is this person? Blah, blah, blah. And then I'll work backwards from that and start building things around it. And that'll take me 3 months. And that is me marinated in that idea. Like, okay, well, I've got a sort of silhouette of a character who did this. Like, what interesting thing could possibly happen here? Because I'm always trying to merge. My novels tend to drift across genres, and it's because of exactly what you said. Because that to me is exciting. That if I'm taking the reader with me, and it's like, well, a minute ago you were reading a murder mystery, but now you're reading a romance, and in a minute you'll be reading a supernatural thriller. If I can do that, I find that absolutely fascinating, and I love that stage, and I love the planning, and I start piecing it together and moving things around. So I plan. I've got various different ways of planning, and I've used 3 different methods for each of the novels to sort of reflect kind of the way the novel tells the story. And that's it. So I'm like, what if this fucked up thing happened next? Where would that go? How would that affect the plan? Oh, that's brilliant because it sends the book off at a right angle. And then I can follow the plan, and then I plan it. And once all that is in stage, once I'm like, actually, I now think after 3 months that there are no more ideas coming to this, or the ideas are coming as staler than the ones that already exist. Or worse, I'm just messing with it for messing with its sake.
Right. You're over tinkering with it. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's when I'll start writing.
So, and then when you are in the process of writing, don't you ever have that moment of like, oh, maybe this is a better idea? Or you say, I'm committed to what I've done in those 3 months and I'm not deviating from this course.
No, I did it. So the 60,000 words I threw away on the first book, that was because I deviated from the plan. And it just didn't. What happened there was that novel was so tightly plotted. That novel was like the same day on a Groundhog Day loop with body swapping in it. So that day couldn't possibly be altered because if you changed it a minute there,
right. Everything else has to change.
Oh, it all collapsed.
That's terrible.
So exactly, it's your worst nightmare as a fever. Right. So I stuck to it then. And the second novel, actually, when I first started planning it, I came up with this idea of lighthousing, which is where I would have my massive plot point set in stone, but I would give myself 2 or 3 chapters of freedom to try and work out how I got between them. And my idea with that, I visualized that as like an ocean chart. Like I drew it out so it looked like an ocean chart with actual islands. And it was like, my novel's the ship getting between them. And that's the book I was writing. So that kind of worked until I started writing it. And then I was like, well, if I don't know the 3 chapters how I get there, all I tend to do is waffle for 3 chapters. I'm just like, it's like me waiting to get to where I'm going.
You need your own direction.
I did. And that's why I ended up filling in those bits between the lighthouses anyway. So I knew each time. I tell you the other thing I need to do is I can't ever as well sit down with a blank page. I can't. Like I find that the most insufferably hard thing. Yeah. So at the end of every writing day, I will always make sure that I'm either halfway through a chapter or I've got a paragraph or 2 paragraphs into the next chapter. Yeah. And that way I've got something, I've got a beachhead and then I can work from that. But if I don't have that, I swear to God, I will sit there for about 4 hours just trying to get going.
Just to get the momentum. I love ending a day on right before a scene I can't wait to write. Like I'm not going to get into it right now. I'm going to start that tomorrow. So you have something to look forward to. And a lot of people will start like literally type the last page over again. Just verbatim, just to literally give them momentum to get into it. It's I have one friend who reads poetry before he sits down to write every day, and he writes dark mysteries and stuff like that. So it's fascinating. Well, listen, we're going to do a little storytelling and then wrap up. So this is the fun part. I've had so many great experiences doing this with different people, and it's always fascinating to see how people's minds work. But rather than pick a random book from the shelf, I've already kind of randomly picked 3 books, and I'm going to let you choose one. So these are of no particular significance. But War of the Rats. I don't even remember this book. I don't remember it. One of our fellow brothers at Source Books, Randall Silvis. I don't know if you know him. 2 Days Gone, which is a beautiful book. And actually, my signed copy of Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles that I got signed at she was at Thriller Fest one year. And I'm like, I don't care if I have to lug this all the way back home with me. I'm buying this.
That's your luggage allowance right there.
That's right. So choose one of those.
We're going War of the Rats, aren't we? How are we not going for War of the Rats?
I was hoping you'd go that direction. Mm-hmm. Pick a page between 1 and 400.
370.
And then pick a sentence between 1 and say 5.
3.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to read this sentence, and then you just give me a sentence or 2, whatever you feel like doing, and then we'll back and forth and then I'll call into it after a few minutes. So the character's name is Zaitsev, Russian. Zaitsev stroked the commissar's shoulder gently.
The commissar turned around. Who the hell are you, and why are you in my bedroom?
Zaitsev said, I didn't want to alarm you, commissar. I'm the new ensign, and I wanted to alert you that there's a leak on the ship.
We're on a ship. When did we get on a ship? I'd just gone to bed. I'd fallen asleep. What's happening?
Zaitsev knew that everything was falling apart quickly, so he decided to be more aggressive in his actions. He put his palm on the commissar's head and said, "You have a terrible fever, sir. You probably don't remember anything, but it's really important that we get out of here right now."
He looked into his open, honest face, searching for deceit. He'd always been good at seeing deceit in people, but all he could see in this man was the truth. He stood up, buckled his saber to his waist, and followed him out of the room.
Zaitsev followed him from behind and made sure that the saber didn't get anywhere too close to him. They were on a submarine, and they had to lower their heads when they were going down the passageway. The commissar continued to be confused, and at one point felt a wave of nausea overcome him.
He began to remember the experiments when he'd been a young ensign himself in the Russian Navy. There was something about transporting submarines, wasn't there? There was something about distance. There was something about preemptive strikes. He couldn't quite remember the details, and his head was beginning to ache as the ship seemed to buckle and twist around him.
And then they passed a man in no uniform at all. He was just wearing plain clothes, a t-shirt, and denim pants. He was an old man, and he had deep scars on his face. And the commissar didn't even know if this man were real, but he was completely recognizable. And that's when he remembered the other experiments, where he would look up into this man's eyes just before the injection took place.
The pain coursed through him, the pain of the injection. It was as if it had just happened. It was as if this man had just jabbed it straight into his neck, the way he always had. He lurched across the room, his head spinning, and wrapped his hands around this old man's neck, driving him into the bulkhead. He was going to throttle him. He was going to kill him. It didn't matter what else happened to him on that voyage. He could feel the hands of the ensign tugging at him, trying to drag him away, but he wouldn't. He needed this.
There was a blow to the back of his head, not enough to knock him out, but enough for him to suddenly see clearly. He slowly released his grip on the man's neck, only to realize it was not an old man at all. This was nothing but a kid, couldn't have been more than 24, and wasn't somebody he remembered at all.
Oh, that's nice. He looked down at the terrified child, and that's what he was, a child. He began to remember more things about his time in captivity. He remembered the ensign, didn't he? Behind him. But he wasn't an ensign at all. Why was something began to happen? Flashes of insight. This kid had brought him food. This kid had held the needle. This kid wasn't a kid at all. He turned around.
I think we're going to call it there.
Yeah.
That was great. So, you know, you are a pantser. You can just make it up as on the spot. That was great.
Mate, it's just improv, isn't it? It's really fun when you're doing it with somebody else as well. Because it's
but
just
can't
like,
you visualize it though? Like, can't you just totally see the scene and like, you know, it usually gets very dark very quickly. In my experience, maybe that's my influence, but I don't have any trouble like visualizing what might happen next. And because you're playing off of the energy of the other person, and even regardless of what they give you to work with, it's exciting, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just kind of like, it's almost the way your brain, it feels to me just like a very natural extension of the way I would plot anyway. My problem is, and I'm kind of there, like, it's really fun playing the game, but I escalate very quickly in my own plots anyway. And that's kind of where my planning comes in, because it's like, whoa, you're going to have to slow down before you get to that fireworks factory. Just take it down a notch. But like that scene, yeah, the visualization of it and the sense of like, that's really cool. Like, you want to go back to that boat immediately and find out what's going on with these people and why they're there. And that would be fun.
And certainly paranoia is always fun. I know. I'm sure it's nothing like King Rat by James Clavell, which was a great book, but maybe this is a great book. I have just zero memory of it.
It doesn't suggest it's a great book, though, does it? in its own right.
This might have been somebody's inspiration to become a writer, because they read this and they're like, I could do better than that.
Yeah, maybe it was the inspiration for King Rat. Maybe that's what that was.
Exactly. Hey, listen, man, I had a great time talking to you, and I'm glad I got to know you a little bit better. And, I'm so just excited for all the success that you've had. And it's such a, I'm sure you're the kind of person who never would have expected to be where you are now. And I hope you appreciate, I'm sure you do, like how difficult it is to get into, the position that you're in as a writer. And it's just tremendous that you've been able to achieve that. So I'm really just thrilled for you.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate that so much. Yeah, like I don't believe me. There's not a day goes by but I'm just like very, very happy to be, let alone an author, which is an incredibly difficult job. And you know how many people come up to you and want to be authors and have put so much on the line and put so much off and are not even getting on with their own lives because they want this gig so badly, let alone to be one who can, make a proper living out of it and live a nice life and give things to their kids. Like I'm a very, very lucky man.
You're not laying bricks.
No, I'm not laying bricks. I don't, however, have a magnificent room like you do with a nice bookshelf and stuff. So,
we have a lot of space here in Colorado. So, well, listen, enjoy the rest of your week, and great to talk to you. And thanks again.
Thanks for me, mate. I appreciate it.
Take it easy, buddy.
Bye.
Bye. So that was my conversation with Stuart Turton. It was very, very engaging. I had a lot of fun, and most importantly, he made me laugh. If you can make me laugh, you're my friend for life. I'd love to tell you where to find out more about Stuart Turton, but for the life of me, I can't find a website for him. But if you type in Stuart Turton into Google, there's a shit ton of information about him because he's become very popular. If you want to find out more about me or my books, my latest is The Dead Husband. You can just go to my website at carterwilson.com and make sure to sign up for my newsletter because there's a lot of cool stuff in there and you can win things. And who doesn't like that? So that's it for now. More episodes coming out soon. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care.